Okay, choral artisans, I want to talk for a moment about the choral experience and to give you some context, to give you the big picture of the what, when, where, how, this process that we're all involved in as we prepare for our Beethoven concert. Is there a map? Is there a journey? Is there intention in what we're doing? Especially since we're not able to meet regularly, weekly, face to face. And it starts with this idea, and I have it up here on the whiteboard, is that really choral singing is a gift given by an ensemble to an audience. But a gift cannot be bestowed unless it's legitimately possessed by the giver, right? A gift must be owned before it can be given away. And ownership is impossible without purchase. So the acquisition or the acquiring of this gift, which really comes at a price or a cost, is a necessary prerequisite for really honest ownership. Now, at the same time, gifts seldom are given unless they're highly valued by the giver. And high value proceeds from appreciation, right? Coming to treasure the inherent worth of the object that's in question. And so understanding is what makes a gift valuable and makes it worthy. It's really an essential step in selecting a gift to give to another. So then these human dynamics that I've just shared really form a sequential, phased model, if you will, for understanding the choral experience. And in its simplest form, four things take place. There's acquisition, there's comprehension, there's ownership, and then lastly, there's communion. And I want to break down these four steps for you. Okay, now I know this feels a little bit like a college class or an intellectual exercise, but really hang in here with me because I think it's gonna hopefully communicate the power of what we're trying to do. So number one, the first step of this phase is acquisition. It's accuracy. It's mastering the fundamentals. What's the raw data of the music? And I talk about the different elements of good choral singing. We've talked about this numerous times, but singing the right pitch at the right time on the correct element of speech, whether it's the vowel or the final consonant, at a dynamic level. That we're not singing everything forte or mezzo piano, but there's a different shading, if you will, that comes through the dynamics. So before we think about any other aspect of the process of communicating music, there's this first step or foundation of that we got to know the right pitches. We have to know our starting note. We have to recognize this particular phrase has some difficult rhythm to it. So I need to make sure that I get the rhythm correct and that there's integrity involved in this first step of acquisition. And a true artist can't move beyond this first step until the musical disciplines are satisfied, before we move from discipline to delight. For some reason, there's some obnoxious horn outside my house. Sorry about that. There it is again. I wonder what pitch that is. Try to figure that out. So we've talked about the first phase is acquisition. Then we move to the second phase, which is comprehension. So how do we take all those different elements of raw data? How do they fit into one whole, if you will? Right? And so a couple of things here is that the ensemble develops an awareness, if you will. So how does the part that I'm singing relate to the soprano's part, right? Or in this particular section of the piece, are the two sections, altos and sopranos, are they in duet with one another? So it's being able to kind of break out of your own kind of silo of sound and become aware of what's going on in the other sections. Also, it's an understanding of musical structure, and not to get too academic, but how does one phrase lead into another phrase? How is the composer utilizing the musical devices to communicate what he's trying to say? So is it written in an A-B-A form? So is it binary? Is it ternary? Three-part? So just identifying how the piece kind of fits together structurally. All right? And then becoming aware of the text and isolating the poem or the words, separating that from the music and just looking at it, observing it, separate from the musical aspects of it. Okay? And then I have here those other elements of good choral singing that we talk about. So number one, we talk about the right pitch. Number two, at the right time, on the correct element of speech, at a dynamic level. Then this moves into the comprehension part, delivered in a vocal color, right? So are we singing with a brute force or more of a bruised sound, all right? Appropriate to the musical style and structure. So we would not sing the Beethoven Moonlight Sonata Kyrie the same way that we would sing one of the contemporary pieces by Jake Runestad, right? We're recognizing that there's a difference due to the historical context of how the composer has written and put notes down on a piece of paper. And then lastly, sensitive to textual meaning and emphasis, right? That we begin to understand how the words interact with the notes and how the composer is articulating his thought through bringing more understanding and more emphasis to his language, his musical language, how it just impacts the textual language. All right, again, I know this may seem very intellectual and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so bored, but it's really important, all right? So continue to hang in there, right? So we've talked number one, this four-phase model of one is acquisition, acquiring, mastering the fundamentals, then a movement to comprehension, to begin to understand the piece in a more kind of stepping back from it, if you will, and moving into more of the deep communication that needs to take place. Okay, phase number three is ownership. Really important phase of this process. And this is when you as the singer recognize that as you sing, you are a human being with feelings, with emotion, with life experience. And you begin to personalize the music, right? That you become more invested by not just getting up and singing right notes, but you recognize, hey, my life story intersects with the story of this piece. And you're able to become more transparent, more vulnerable, and you're singing from the heart. That it doesn't just become a performing, but it becomes a communication. You're not just imparting information, but you're communicating a message, if you will. All right? And that means that then it bears upon you to take on more personal responsibility. I've made the statement before. Great corporate sound depends on great personal responsibility. All right? And so it's moving into the deeper meaning, right? Kind of internally reflecting how does, particular seasons of my life, maybe a difficulty, a time of intense suffering, how does that amplify or really resonate, which is a great word, with you as the composer communicates it through his song, and then your heart, right, recognizes and becomes alert and attuned to, wow, this song, this piece of music really gets me, if you will. And it's just a really exciting discovery, if you will. Knowledge of the story of the arc of what the composer is trying to communicate, not only through the music but through the text. And so this is the third phase, which is ownership. All right? One last step coming. Okay, phase number 3 is ownership. Really important phase of this process. And this is when you as the singer recognize that as you sing, you are a human being with feelings, with emotion, with life experience. And you begin to personalize the music, right? That you become more invested by not just getting up and singing right notes, but you recognize, hey, my life story intersects with the story of this piece. And you're able to become more transparent, more vulnerable, and you're singing from the heart. That it doesn't just become a performing, but it becomes a communication. You're not just imparting information, but you're communicating a message, if you will. All right? And that means that then it bears upon you to take on more personal responsibility. I've made the statement before. Great corporate sound depends on great personal responsibility. All right? And so it's moving into the deeper meaning, right? Kind of internally reflecting how does, particular seasons of my life, maybe a difficulty, a time of intense suffering, how does that amplify or really resonate, which is a great word, with you as the composer communicates it through his song, and then your heart, right, recognizes and becomes alert and attuned to, wow, this song, this piece of music really gets me, if you will. And it's just a really exciting discovery, if you will. Knowledge of the story of the arc of what the composer is trying to communicate, not only through the music but through the text. And so this is the third phase, which is ownership. All right? One last step coming. So we move from acquisition to comprehension to ownership, and the last phase is communion, if you will. And this brings in the element of how what we are doing, how it connects with our audience and with our listeners. It's becoming aware of their needs, their expectations, and their experiences, right? And so as we get up to perform, we're not just up there making sure that our technique is spot on, which hopefully it will be, but we recognize that we are communicating to other human beings, to other people, right? And so there's empathy. I can't wait for us to be able to sing Your Soul is Song, the Jacob Runnestead piece, coming out of what we've all been through with this COVID-19, right? It's going to be a powerful moment. So it's developing empathy. It's being present in the moment, right? That as I'm singing through this particular piece, I'm not just concentrating on my particular vocalism, but I'm present to what's going on in the room at that moment. And then there's just this desire to connect. And that's what music is really about. It's human connection. It's how we've been designed as human beings, that we need desperately to connect with other people, that we're not just singing for ourselves, but we're singing to connect in a powerful way. All right. So we've progressed through our 4 phases, right? From acquisition to comprehension to ownership and then to communion. Hopefully, to help you understand these 4 phases, there's just questions that are associated with each phase that helps give more meaning. So in the acquisition phase, we're asking the question, what's here, right? What's the musical data that we need to begin to master, all right? The question that we're asking in the comprehension stage is, why is it here? And how does it all fit together? How do the pitches, how does the text, how do the dynamics, how does all of this fit together, if you will? In the ownership stage, we're asking the questions, what does it mean? And what does it mean to me as an individual? And then what does it mean to us as a choral community? And then the question that we're asking in the communion phase, or the last stage, if you will, of this process is, how does the song that we're singing connect with the way the audience is living? So that's our model. This is what serves as the big picture for every piece we learn, every session that we've had, giving us a blueprint, if you will, of the choral experience. And so in rehearsals, I'm trying to tether my instructions to what's going on. All right? And really a lot of choirs kind of just camp out here and maybe move into the comprehension stage. But what does it mean for us as choral artisans to invest ourselves in such a way that we not only move from acquisition, but to comprehension, to ownership, and then this desire to communicate with our listeners. That's what the Choral Artisans is all about. And again, I'm grateful for you and the responsibility that you all are taking. And this is going to be an awesome journey that we take with Beethoven.